A very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Magandang umaga po, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon, at magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. We would like to welcome you to your hour, and this is Rita Gadi. It is the day after the elections, national and local. We have officials that won. We have re-electionists also likewise that made it. There were others that lost, and that's the way elections go. Losers, winners, and the people in general observing what has happened to the ballots that they have cast. Before we begin our program, first I would like to offer our congratulations to President-elect, if you can call him that, or President already announced as far as the unofficial tally of votes are concerned, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as President of the Republic, and Inday Sara, Mayor of Davao City, as our Vice President. There will still be the process, the legal process, proclaiming them both when the returns will be submitted to the Commission on Elections and then to the to the Houses of Congress, upper and lower chamber, that will meet as what they call the National Board of Canvassers, the way it was ever since we have had this constitution where it is in, you have the provision which says that the announcement or the proclamation of the winners of the presidential and vice presidential elections will be undertaken by the legislative branch of government, that is the upper and lower chamber, members of the House of Representatives and the Senate in joint assembly. And after the canvassing of votes, which normally would take effect as far as all the canvass returns are already submitted, then there will be the proclamation of the winner. The actual oath-taking ceremony has also been scheduled according to law on June 30, 2022. We have had this May 9th elections of so many positions in government, as we've said, both national and local. We have, for instance, well, of course, the office of the President and Vice President, members of the Senate, 12 of them that will be coming in. Some are re-electionists, some are new members. Others have been there for quite some time but are continuing their tenure of office. And then you have members of the House of Representatives. If we are to count the members of the party list who have also made it, then that would be something like 320 members of the House of Representatives. And then you have the governors of the provinces, their provincial boards. We have 81 provinces throughout the country. And then we have the mayors, city and municipal mayors, together with their city and municipal councils. So you can imagine the length of the ballot that actually has been already cast by over half of the total number, or more than half of the total number of registered voters. We understand that there is something like 67 million of our registered voters, and 85% have cast their ballot. This is one of the biggest electoral returns that we have as far as registered voters that cast their ballots are concerned. And perhaps in a long, long time, perhaps the only time, 36 years ago, we had a majority president with the election of President Ferdinand E. Marcos, and then 36 thereafter, we now have a majority elected president. As I've said, these are the unofficial tabulations, but by all indications, that is already how the trending, not the trending, but that is already how the figures are coming out insofar as the elected officials for the two highest offices of our republic are concerned. First off, I'd like to bring you back to the history of our program title this afternoon, To Be on Top of Destiny. Where is this coming from? a long time ago, when President Marcos was already in exile in Honolulu, and there were already the movements undertaken by the Philippine government under Corazon Aquino, together with the United States government Department of Justice, to indict President Marcos, Mrs. Marcos, members of their family in the United States. And that was already the beginning of the ordeal that they had to go through. Insofar as legal cases are concerned, one of the most crucial of all these cases was the RICO case, which I must have emphasized over and over the past 3 years that we started this program. The RICO case is the case involving the violation of an American law known as the Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organization Act. This, if you try to summarize it or to say it briefly, it accuses President Marcos of running a criminal syndicate, and because of that, amassing wealth due to that criminal syndicate and purchasing real estate properties in the United States of America. So that is where the fraud is supposed to come from, and that is the amassing of illegal wealth coming from the coffers of government or the money of the Filipino people. So you can imagine how difficult it must have been for President Marcos, Mrs. Marcos, the rest of the family, to face the mightiest sword of justice, the United States of America justice system, with such a case imposed on them, against them. And that is where one day when we came to visit President Marcos, and we were talking about all those documents that were already being gathered to provide evidences of the case that they're building up against the Marcoses. And well, I mentioned something like napakarami nito na mga dokumento, because at the time we had the office of Lolong Lazaro, who was the legal consultant at the time during President Marcos' tenure of office. And most of the documents that were being presented to Marcos at the time were also, copies were also sent over to Manila. And we have read many of them even before the trial began in the United States of America, in Los Angeles, and in New York. So you can imagine how voluminous those documents are. So I did mention this to President Marcos when he was already in exile in Honolulu. And the first thing he said was, do not worry about that. Exaggeration is another form of falsification. Exaggeration, he meant na sa pagkadami-dami ng mga dokumento na yon, ano bang ibig sabihin yan? Yun ang sabi niya, exaggeration is another form of falsification. And then I said, pero mukhang talagang ang hirap nito na, you know, litisin sapagkat United States of America ito. So that was when he said, Rita, do not argue with destiny. Just be on top of it. So doon po nanggaling itong title ng ating program, Just Be on Top of Destiny. 36 years after the Marcoses were flown out of Manila, from the Philippines, from his seat of office to the United States of America, we now have his son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., coming into that particular platform where his father was 36 years ago. By all accounts of the figures and the data, now it is always continuously being analyzed. I don't know why they still try to position all of these numbers like this is coming from there, and this is how it goes, and these are the regions that have more number of votes, etc. Pero ando na yon, nakasulat na talaga ang mga sinulat ng mga kababayan natin. The voters already registered their affirmation that Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will be the next president of the Republic of the Philippines. So, and Inday Sara, the next vice president. So we have it that you have Ferdinand Marcos Jr. now on top of destiny. What is destiny? Ang daming mga definitions na masasabi dyan coming from that Latin word destinum. It is some kind of a force, invisible, mysterious, divine, through which the life of a person is going to be led to, and that is determined already by that particular fate. Yan nga ang sinasabi na yun ang iyong destiny. In the title of the book of President Marcos, remember how it was? That was also the film that was produced during the campaign period when he was running for the first time for the office of the presidency in 1965. And that was Iginuhit ng Tadhana. It has been written by destiny. So that is where we are taking off from that particular word destiny. That over the past 36 years, 3 decades and 6 years, sa haba ng panahon na nagsimula noong 1986, ano ngayon ang nangyayari dito sa ating political landscape na yung anak na tinatawag nilang diktador, magnanakaw, at lahat ng batikos na kanilang ginawa laban sa pamilya ng mga Marcoses at dito na nakasulat na ng taong bayan sa kanilang mga balota that they are actually writing the destiny of this young man, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Inday Sara Duterte as the next leaders of our country. So we go back in time, but we have done this already so many times over the past 3 years. I choke sometimes trying to prevent my tears to fall every time I go back and forth to this. Masakit pong talagang tingnan ang mga nakaraan na nangyari sapagkat lahat ng ito ay hindi nasulat, hindi na pag-usapan. And it is very seldom that you hear what actually happened to the Marcoses during this 36-year period. We hear about them entering into public office. You have Miss Aimee, for instance, she was governor and then now senator. You have Ferdinand Marcos, who also was governor and then congressman and then member of the Senate. And so you have this going through their lives together with Imelda Marcos, who also at one time decided to run also for the office of the presidency and then entered the House of Representatives, first representing Leyte, where she is from, and then representing the district of her husband in Ilocos Norte. And that was the last of her political tenure before she retired from politics. And that is where we could see that the Marcoses, their family, have always been in the service of the Filipino people. Pag sinasabi nga na dynastic, but that is how it goes. I mean, like, they're voted into office by their own constituents, by the whole nation, as a matter of fact. When Miss Aimee Marcos ran for the Senate, and in the same manner when Ferdinand Marcos Jr. also ran for the Senate. So here it is that we could see that in the period that they have been back to the country from 1986, the people have come about voting them into office. Kaya ngayon nakikita natin that from 1986, during the time of Mrs. Aquino, where there was this rage, this vilification, this anger, this hatred that was spewed against the Marcoses, their relatives, their family, their friends, their associates, lahat na ng konektado sa kanila. That was how it was then. Napakasakit na mga tinatamaan ng mga batikos na yan because many times they were not able to answer this. There was no access to the media, no access to television, no access to any method of being able to communicate to the people, to explain what is actually happening to them. We hear snippets of this. Sometimes it comes out in the newspaper, but very little is actually being talked about it. Until recently, when we had social networking already in full force, this is the technological phenomena where you could post your comments and you could talk about this, and this would be unhampered by any censorship or well, of course, there are stoppages sometimes, and oftentimes this is done by those in Facebook, in YouTube, in Instagram, and whatever. But it is still possible that you're able to post your comments, your opinions, and you're able to speak about this. The way over the past 3 years, in 2019, this Rita Gadi Hour, and we also had the Rita Gadi Chronicles, we were able to trace back and forth what has happened to the Marcoses from 1986. Kaya pag minsan po, pag binabalik-balikan natin, masakit ito na ating kinikwento, ngunit kinakailangan. How many times have I said this every time I open a program? I am not apologizing or propagandizing or trying to defend. It is simply my duty and my responsibility to speak out and tell the truth. What is the truth? This is the truth that they have denied so many times in the past, to this very day. How many times in a day, actually, we hear that those words, human rights violator, stolen wealth, magnanakaw, and all of these adjectives that they attach to the Marcoses. And now they impose this on the son, who is now rising from the multitude of supporters with this long caravans and rallies that he has had over the past months when he announced his candidacy for the presidency. Pero yun nga po ang sinasabi natin. Kaya po natin to binabalikan sapagkat doon natin makikita na dahil sa mga pangyayari over the past 36 years, hindi po na alis sa isip ng mga tao, lalong-lalo na sa panahon ngayon, kung ano ang pinaninindigan ng mga Marcoses. And now you have Ferdinand Marcos Jr. standing not under the shadow of his parents, but on his own, despite the fact that over the past 36 years, he has been vilified just about as often as his father and his mother are both likewise being vilified to this very day. If you hear the chanting and the shouting and the screaming of all of those in support of the other candidate that lost already in these elections, they gathered in front of the Commission on Elections in Intramuros, and they gathered in front of the post office of the Diwasang Bonifacio, again chanting the same invectives and the same accusations that were also being shouted in 1986, 1985, 1986. Bakit ba hanggang sa ngayon, yan pa rin ang kanilang sinisigaw? It seemed as though it is not that they have not changed, but there is so much of this anger and this hatred, and it is very difficult now to explain all of this, although we have gone through understanding why they do so. After all, they have been in power 6 years under Mrs. Aquino and several other administrations after her until her son, Noynoy Aquino, also became president. So dyan makikita natin how often do they revive this? Parang anong sabi nga sa criminal o recidivist na halos paulit-ulit na rin yung ganyang klaseng mga paratang. If it is a fault, then that is how it is being repeated. And through this program from 2019, we have done as best as we could to clarify all of these issues. We began even because of through the courtesy of the Kilusang Demokratiko ng Pilipinas, so that's the KDP, that's the channel that we are using for the Rita Gadi Hour, and early on we also had the Rita Gadi Chronicles. So we began by saying that we are beyond remembering. That was the title of one of our earlier programs. Beyond remembering, meaning that we really have to think of what has happened, kung bakit nagkaganito, hindi lang ang mga Marcos, ngunit ang ating bayan. What happened to our country from the time that they gathered in EDSA and say that out there they said that there's going to be change, but instead they created their own fundamental law. Mrs. Aquino appointed people to write their own constitution, which to this day is being already demanded to be changed completely. It is no longer just answering to the needs of the times, but it has become so prejudicial to many of the progressive movements that are necessary in this particular stage and in our geopolitics, the geopolitical world that we are in right now. So that was how we began in this program, Beyond Remembering. We had something like 10,000 viewers early on. And then we also started with the historical notes, which again, as I've said, we have listed down what has been happening since then. The first law that Mrs. Aquino created was the PCGG, the Philippine Commission for Good Government, which by that own law, she already declared that the Marcoses amassed illegal wealth. Can you imagine a law that already proclaimed and accused you of illegal wealth? And that is the Marcoses, their family, their relatives, their friends, and their associates. And that PCGG has continued to sequester, to sell, And some of them, it has already been reputed that some of them properties have also been stolen already, whether by the agents themselves or other people within that office. So we can see how important that was as far as history is concerned. Hindi ito napag-uusapan, hindi ito nasulat. Up to this day, we still should have an accounting of the PCGG. They keep on accusing Marcos of having stolen. But there is one basic question. Ano ba ang ninakaw niya? Nagnakaw daw sa taong bayan. How many times have we repeated this in so many of our episodes? What did they steal? Isn't it a fact that one important document or one important witness in court should testify that here is where the evidence is? One proof that money from the Philippine government, the money of the Filipino people, was stolen by President Marcos. Walang nangyaring ganon up to this day. And always they say it's unexplained wealth, it's illegally acquired wealth, it's stolen wealth. But there still is no proof. And because of this, we have come out with what? With a summary of the 350,000 documents that were presented in the trial in New York. Ganong kadami yan, 350,000 documents which are supposed to be presented as evidences against the Marcoses that they have stolen the money of the Filipino people. And they also had to sit in the witness stand, 95 witnesses. Napapaulit-ulit na ako nito. And yet, after 4 months of trial, not one of those 95 witnesses, not one single document of those 350,000 pages was able to come out categorically and clearly. Because remember, this is a criminal case. And whatever else are you accusing the Marcoses of, it must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. So even one document and even one witness never came out as to prove that the Marcoses did steal the money of the Filipino people. In spite of that, tuloy-tuloy pa rin for the past 36 years, the accusation that nagnakaw sila. And now you hear the chanting. And now you hear the student representative in the Board of Regents of the University of the Philippines, the state university, saying that they are not going to attend classes under a Marcos presidency kasi magnanakaw. Magnanakaw yung anak o galing ang pinanggalingan niya ay ang isang ama na magnanakaw. And yet to this day, the question still begs an answer. What did they steal? What proof do they have that they stole? You have presidential candidates during their campaign accusing them of this. I will not mention the names anymore, but several of them have been exclaiming to our people, ayan, yan ang gusto nyong i-elect into office, yung anak ng magnanakaw. So you can imagine how painful this is, how difficult it is. And over the past 3 years, in so many of our episodes, alam niyo, halimbawa, we had one episode, The Truth Survives. And that truth is a lengthy 1-hour discussion of the trial in New York. Alam niyo kung gaano kadami ang nanood niyan? Well, we have a record of those that are viewing it. At dumadami pa ito on a day-to-day basis. But at the time, when we had this program, we had 24,753 people who were watching this. And then we had the part 2 of all of these historical notes. We had 65,000 people viewing this. We had the paper trail. Ayan na naman. Sabi ko nga dun sa trial sa New York, naglabas sila ng isang napakalaking chart, 6 feet by 12 feet, na doon nakalagay yung nakabox, meron silang drawing, nakahon na yun ng Swiss accounts. Pagkatapos nilipat yung accounts na yon sa Amerika, at yung mga pera na yon ay bumili ng real estate property sa New York. Napakalaki nung kanilang graph na yon. 4 na FBI agent, yung isa talaga na napakaingay pa noon, Agent Trimbach, hindi ko makalimutan yung pangalan niya. Well, we presented that also in this program, and we had something like 24,000 people that watched it. And in part 2 of the continuation of that program, we had 63,665 people watching and listening to what we were trying to express. Hindi po ito an apology, hindi po ito propaganda. This is simply a narrative of what happened in the New York trial. We have the documents, And beyond that, I was there. I listened to the witnesses. I took down notes of what they said. And above everything else, we have a copy of the jury binder, which is what was given. It's a 4-inch thick lot, parang malaking-malaking folder yon, na yun ang binigay sa members of the jury para kanilang basahin mabuti sa paglilitis ni Imelda Marcos doon sa New York. And then we had so many other of these episodes. We had one program, for instance, Retribution and Atonement. Ganun kadami, 34,000 ang nanood. And then, of course, one important question that we asked, which we have been asking so many times, which to this day, we are asking all of those now gathered, rallying, and all of these candidates accusing the Marcoses. The question of our program and what we discussed for 1 full hour was, where is the money? Alam ba nyo kung gaano kadami ang nakinig dyan at nanood? We had 182,990 people viewing this. Wala naman nagbatikos sa mga sinabi natin. No, wala naman nagkontra. Now you have a commissioner of the PCGG coming up with all kinds of statement na nagnakaw dito that the cronies did this, that some of his friends were accusing Marcos of having stolen. Nasaan ang preba? Why did they not come out with it even then when the trial was going on? Meron pa bang ibang mas matinding korte kesa sa korte sa Amerika? That's the severest court of justice. The Department of Justice itself of the United States of America. All of that, can you imagine? So I listed down many of these episodes. Again, you know, as I've said, this Where is the Money, where we had 182,000 viewers. And then we had several other episodes like the Marcoses and the PCGG. Yan, I mentioned already the PCGG. At yan, alam ba nyo kung gaano kadami ang nanood dyan? 137,000 ang nakinig. And then we had, we had Imelda, the mother. I spoke of what she has done for the country, and we had 133,000 people listening. At yung gusto-gusto nila, yung love story ni Marcos at saka ni Imelda, ang dami ding nakinig niyan, ang daming nanood. But I'm going back and forth to all of these episodes we have had in this program, in your program, the Rita Gadi Hour. Like for instance, we had explaining the unexplainable. Ito yung talagang pinaka-simple lang. Again, I go back to that question. Ano ba ang ninakaw nila? Ano ba ang preba nila? What is your proof that he stole money from the Filipino people? You kept on screaming this and shouting this. My friends, my good friends, my relatives, they are all shouting this likewise in accusation. They look at me and they can hardly believe what they're listening to, but that is the way it goes. Because as I've said, to steal is a criminal offense, especially if you're going to steal from the Filipino people. And when I spoke of this, there were something like 63,000 people that watched it and listened to it. Ang dami po nito, pati yung mga sinasabi natin na yung connection, the Communist Party and so forth, and then martial law, for instance, we also had a whole program on this. We had 60,000 viewers listening to our discussion on this. And then we had this question, what have they done to the Marcoses? We had 444,000 people listening to us. What have they done to the Marcoses? Kaya kung titingnan ninyo, for the past 36 years, sa lahat ng mga batikos na isinasagawa nila, all the accusations that they now continue to hurl on Ferdinand Marcos Jr., what is it that we spoke of 2 episodes ago? We have a multitude arising. Yan din ang tinanong sa akin ni President Marcos sa Honolulu. When he was given a copy of the video of the rallies of the Marcos loyalists in Luneta, you must remember that the loyalists began the rallies the first Sunday after the Marcoses left the Philippines. And when President Marcos saw the video, he looked at me and asked, sinong mga ito? Saan sila nanggaling? In other words, he himself could not recognize the people that gathered there at Luneta. You know, we have a candidate that keeps on talking about yung kanyang krusada is to go to the poorest of the poor, yung mga nasa sulok ng ating bayan na walang nag-aasikaso sa kanila, yung mga nasa laylayan. My goodness. Alam ba ninyo, I mean, referring to this candidate, as early as 1986, yung mga laylayan na yan, sila ang nasa luneta na sumisigaw na at that time, pabalikin si President Marcos sa Pilipinas. That was 1986, 36 years ago. Karamihan ng mga nakikita ninyo sa mga rally, sa mga caravan na sumasama kay Ferdinand Marcos Jr., kay Inday Sara ng Davao, na the big crowd that they have on the streets, walking with them, joining them, and then the big crowds that they have in the rallies. Mga tao yan galing sa laylayan na hindi natin ma-identify na kung sino sila. Kung titingnan natin ang demographics, sino ba yung mga yan? Pinanganak ba sila? Are they 26 to 20 to 41 years old? Hindi pa sila, ilang taon sila? 36 years ago, hindi pa sila pinapanganak. Kung 26 to 41 years old, ang babata pa nito mga ito. Mga apo na ba sila ng mga andoon noong panahon ni President Marcos? Yan, gaano kadami yan? We have 23.9 million of them in that category. Yung tawag nga sa kanila yung mga millennials. Pag-uusapan natin yung mga 42 years old to 57, meron din silang tinatawag nga yan ng Generation X. Ilan sila? 16.7 million. Kung titingnan natin yung sumunod na generation, itong mga kabataan ngayon, yung mga 18-year-olds, yung mga ngayon pa lang boboto, up to 25, ilan yan sila? 13 million. Tapos yung panahon namin, halimbawa noon, kung 58 years old up to our age now, antiquity, ilan yan? Mga 11.9 million. Ito na yung tinatawag na yung baby boomers, kung baga, whatever you call them anyway. So kung titingnan natin yung demographics nito, sino ba yung crowd na yan ngayon? Itong rising multitude na sumasama dito sa kampanya at andun sa mga rally ni Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Hindi po ba? Nakikilala ba ninyo? Kagaya ng sinabi ni President Marcos sa Hawaii, nung tumingin sa akin, pinapanood niya yung mga rally sa Luneta noon, 36 years ago. Sabi niya, sino sila? Saan sila nanggaling? Well, to the candidate who keeps on talking about yung mga tao sa laylayan, yan ang mga tao sa laylayan. At ano pang sabi ng mga ibang kandidato? Kailangan siguro turuan itong mga taong ito kasi niloloko sila, nauulol sila. They are being fooled by the lies against, the lies of the Marcoses. Anong lie ang pinag-uusapan nila? Kung kabuluan, kung lahat yan ay, if all of them are lies, it has survived 36 years, my goodness, and the passion and the avid participation of all of this. Now, you could not say that that is because of a lie, or because they're condemning the Marcoses, or because they did not believe. Hindi sila naniwala. At hanggang ngayon, yaan pa rin ang pinagdidikdikan ng lahat nitong mga kandidatong ito and all of those in opposition against the Marcoses. And whatever for. And that is why you have this candidate, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Of all the things that he could pick up as far as a slogan or a rallying cry, that is what he chose. Unification. Magkaisa tayo. Because that is what the Marcoses, their family, has gone through. That is what this young man, I always considered him a young man, sapagkat, ilang taon ba siya noon? 8, 10 years old? Nung umaakyat siya sa hagdanan sa Malacanang, nung ang kanyang ama was elected President of the Republic of the Philippines in 1965 and assumed the office of the presidency in 1966. 36 years ago. Yan siya ngayon, aakyat din sa gusali na yon. Ngunit itong panahon ng 36 years ng kanyang buhay, ng buhay ng kanyang ina, walang ginawa ang mga lumalaban sa kanila at ng opposition. Sinimulan na nung panahon ni Mrs. Aquino. All the anger, the hatred, and the accusations to this day. hindi lang nila naisip kung gaano kasakit ang kanilang pinagagawa laban sa pamilyang ito. And yet, in spite of that, ni isang salita, not one word of anger or bitterness coming out from, first from the mother, Imelda Romualdez Marcos, from the daughters, Aimee and Irene, and now from the son. Not one word, not even to answer, because there is no need to answer what is obvious. Nakita naman as early as 1992 sa pinakamatinding paglilitis na ginawa sa buong mundo laban sa kanilang pamilya, na sila ay nagnakaw sa taong bayan. Anong nangyari sa trial na yon? Bakit walang nagsulat ng matindi tungkol dito? May mga, ang daming mga, there's so many of the local media controlled by the oligarchs, controlled to this day by the oligarchs. Wala namang halos hinawakan ang mga ibang tao ng ating media, kundi sila rin, yung mga lumalaban sa mga Marcoses. And not one of them came out to really analyze and discuss what happened in the trial. Well, we were privileged to be there. We wrote about it on a daily basis. It was published by Francisco Tadad in his newspaper. That's on a daily basis. And as a matter of fact, even as early as the first month of the trial, naka-headlines na nga tayo there is no case against Imelda Marcos. Sapagkat nung nabasa natin at siniyasat natin yung mga dokumento, at nung nadinig din natin yung mga witnesses, and we have a copy of the lineup of those witnesses, ay talagang walang isa sa kanila ang nag-testify o walang isang dokumento akong nakita at wala silang inilagay at iniahin dyan sa korte sa Amerika na nagsasabi ito ang ninakaw ni President Marcos. So that is where all of this is coming from. And can we understand why up to this stage, this time, they are still coming out with such accusations? Galit lang. Ayaw lang nila si Marcos. At kung kailangan natin pang tingnan kung bakit, marahil yun ay nasa kasaysayan na lang. Hindi na kailangan pang intindihin. It is already ingrained in them. Kung talagang galit at kung talagang ayaw, talagang galit at ayaw. Kaya nga, we go back again to this man who is now on top of destiny. The destiny of his career, the destiny of our country. And one word that he has used over and over, repeatedly in all his public pronouncements, in the rallying call that he had in the last other meeting, the Miting de Avance, and in every occasion where he is able to speak about it, ano yung kanyang sinasabi? Pagkakaisa. Team. Unifying, to unite the country. Magsama-sama tayo. That, I think, is one of the most powerful words, one of the most powerful meanings, the most powerful essence that will be able to rally our people together and move on to develop our country in such a manner. So, nakita natin, kagaya nga ng sinabi ko, yung mga nagrarally sa Luneta noon, yung panahon na yon, nung wala na yung mga Marcos, for how many years? Until the time that the dispersals were getting to be even more violent. There were 8 attempts against Mrs. Aquino. Militar na ang gumalaw nung panahon na yon. Bakit? Sapagkat pinakawalan ni Mrs. Aquino si Jose Maria Sison na nakakulong na for rebellion, subversion, for murder. Ang dami ng accusation. Convicted na. Pinakawalan niya. Yung isa pa rin pinakawalan niya, si Dante Buscaino, Commander Dante. So, doon talaga nagdamdam ang ating militar sapagkat ito yung nilalabanan nila sa mga bundok, yung pumapatay ng mga civilians in the countryside, yung mga nagsusunog ng mga equipment, mga nagkikidnap, pagkatapos makakawalan mo. Ayun, nasa Netherlands ngayon. At ito ang masakit. Siya daw ang advisor ng isang kandidato for the presidency. Kaya doon mo lang mararamdaman kung hindi pa nyo nararamdaman na ito ay masakit sa damdamin ng ating militar, lalong-lalo na sila, na they are the ones who defend our country from internal invasion of our own people. That is why in fairness to President Duterte, has created a special office for this, to really get in touch with all of these rebellious groups and make them understand that he is willing to offer anything that they feel they have been deprived of, just so as they would lay down their arms and they could be together with the rest of the country under the body politic under one flag. And that is, again, the theme of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., magkaisa. So you can imagine how it would be as soon as he assumes into office. That is one of the most critical areas that he will be taken care of. Of course, a lot of people are saying about the economy. Saan pa ba manggagaling itong mga panukala, mga programa, mga polisiya ni Ferdinand Marcos Jr. kung hindi sa kanyang tutularan ng mga naisagawa na and the foundations that are already laid by his father and his mother. You have now, for instance, the revival of the Kadiwa stores, kung saan yung mga ani ng ating mga magsasaka, diretso na sa tindahan na mabibili ng taong bayan na hindi na dadaan patong-patong pa sa mga merchants na kumukuha nito galing pa sa bukid. Then you had several others of these programs. President Marcos, during his term, already had a massive agricultural program that we had not just rice production, that we were able to export rice, but also food production para lahat ng plato sa lamesa ng lahat ng tao ay may laman, sapagkat yan aayusin, and that is basic as far as helping the economy is concerned, and several other programs which have already been laid down during the time of his father. And of course, we now have a major changes sapagkat yung nangunguna nga sa senatorial lineup sa pinakamalaking botong nakuha, si Robin Padilla, and he had only 2 items actually that he discussed and talked about repeatedly also. Yan ang tinatawag na federal form of government. Siya ay parang tinatawag ng he's a Muslim convert, and he represents not perhaps, but he represents directly the intent of the Muslims to have not just this autonomy, but autonomy for the rest of the other local government offices of our country, local government units of our country, and that is the federal form. That has already been laid down by President Marcos during his administration, when he had instructed the NEDA to group our provinces into the regions that we have existing today. So, ilang beses ko na rin naulit ito, na pag-aralan na yan. Every province that will be part of the region would be able to sustain itself para hindi na kinakailangan pa na pabalik-balik sa Maynila, the central government. As a matter of fact, that is why Robin Padilla is possibly most popular in Mindanao. It's precisely because kami sa Mindanao, over so many generations, ang tawag nga namin sa Maynila, it's not imperium but imperial. You have an empire within the empire, but this is what we usually colloquially term Manila with, and that is gobyerno sa rawang tao. It's a government of a foreign people, because we seem to be so far away, so distant, so alien, and that is now federal form of government as being espoused. But that could only be possible if we have a new constitution, which will also include a parliamentary form. Tinaman ninyo ang nangyayari ngayon sa dinami-dami ng ating mga representante sa lower chamber. Meron pa tayong upper chamber, merong representatives sa Congress at meron pang senators. Magkaisa na lang, and all they have to do is just legislate. Wala na yung mga project, yung mga pork barrel. Yun na lang ang trabaho nila talaga, to legislate. Indexing of our laws, yung mga kailangan ng i-rescind, yung kailangan ng i-abrogate, yung kailangan ng i-amend. Ano pa ba ang idadagdag sa dinami-dami ng ating batas? That will have to be taken care of now by Parliament itself, and perhaps to re-engineer our laws towards this new order in the world, the new economic order, the new military order of bigger countries, and the new human order that we have to institute to be able to have world peace. So lahat yan will have to be attuned to many things that we are facing tomorrow. pag sinasabi natin future, parang napakalayo. But this is what we are facing actually tomorrow. So this is the reason why we should be on top of destiny. And sabi nga ni President Ferdinand Marcos, do not argue with destiny, just be on top of it. At marahil, hindi marahil, ito na ang nangyari sa kasalukuyan that we have Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Sara Duterte riding on the family name and the name of their parents, of their fathers, and they're riding on top of this destiny that they are now charting for the Filipino people. Ang dami natin dapat ibalik sa mga kasaysayan ng nakaraan sapagkat kung hindi natin ito maaalala, hindi natin talaga matutunguhan ang kinakailangan natin puntahan. So many things have not been spoken of, and we have time and time again over the past 3 years talked about this endlessly. I am thankful for all of those who have sent messages, personal messages to me saying that dahil nga sa ating kwento every Tuesday, sa mga ginawa nung panahon ni President and Mrs. Marcos, nung panahon nila, at hanggang sa paghihirap na dinaanan nila, na ganun ding kahirapan dinaanan ni Ferdinand Marcos Jr., sila ay naliwanagan. At nakita nila na ang dami palang hindi lumalabas sa media. One clear example, nagpadala ang Amerika ng mga foreign observers dito sa ating eleksyon. Anong nakita nila? Doon pa lang sa kampanya, nakita nila sa dami ng tao na sumusuporta kay Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And then they saw, of course, the initial unofficial returns that have come out in the first hour, 2 hours after the votes have been cast. And then you have the opposition exclaiming, bakit nakabilis? Ano ba yan? Why is the transmission so fast? My goodness, we are already in the age of technology. When you text your friend, for instance, do you have to wait for 1 or 2 hours? It's immediate. And that's exactly how the transmission of votes go. As soon as the votes are cast and the machine receives this, it is transmitted immediately to the Board of Canvassers and the municipal and city boards. And then you have, that is why you have the early proclamation of the mayors of the cities and municipalities. And then from there, it will be transmitted directly to the Commission on Elections. Then you have other support systems for this. You have the Pastoral Parish Council, whatever you call them, the NAMFREL, the other independent organizations that are also monitoring and watching the conduct of the elections. Lahat yan, if you could see, they would tally. And so why is this question being raised now as though sinasabi nga may dayaan siguro and so forth? My goodness, you can... Never mind. I will not go back into those numbers again because a lot of people are questioning if in 2016 you had a candidate that had some many million number of votes. Where are those million number of votes now that she is trailing way beyond the way beyond the runner-up of whatever? What a strange term. I shouldn't be using it. But of course, that is how it goes. We have different of this words and adjectives, but again, we are back to that particular period where for 36 years, up to this day, if you listen to all of those agitating, all of the posting in Facebook, in Instagram, in Twitter, of all of those opposing the Marcoses, para namang hindi nyo naiisip na may pakiramdam din naman yung mga Marcoses tungkol sa mga batikos na ginagawa ninyo over the past, saan ka nakakita, 36 years. May pakiramdam din naman yung mga sumusuporta sa kanila. And that is the reason why 2 episodes ago, that is what we talked about. The rising multitude that are supporting the Marcoses at this particular stage. And putting back again on the platform of reality and of history. It is not a revision of history. It simply is the telling of history, and that is another Marcos will be occupying Malacanang very soon. There is a process for this. There will be the convening of the National Board of Canvassers, which is, well, then it was Parliament. Now it is the joint houses of Congress and the Senate. And after that proclamation, there will be shortly afterwards the taking of the oath of office of the president-elect and the vice president-elect. Coming from the north, and coming from the south. Napakaswerte naming taga Mindanao, especially those that are very close to Davao City. Coming from Kidapawan, talagang masaya ang dami kong natanggap ng mga congratulations galing sa mga kababayan ko from Kidapawan, saying that after all this time that, that not just the Marcoses, but all of those associated with them have been persecuted. Kaya kung pag-uusapan natin yan ay talagang napakasakit. At yung marahil ay hindi nila naiintindihan. Ang dami-dami nilang sinasabi na kailangan tulungan yung mga nasa laylayan. Eto na, what do you think Imelda Marcos is feeling at this stage after what she has gone through? You should have seen her in the trial in New York, in a foreign country, being tried by a foreign court, where you have 3 members of the Justice Department of the Prosecution of America. Charles Labella, this John McInerney, and then you have this woman, this lady, Debra Livingstone. What a name. Talagang Livingstone siya. How she would point a finger almost a few centimeters at the tip of the nose of Imelda. And to the jury and to the rest of those spectators watching the trial, what does she say? This is a woman that stole from the Filipino people. Napakasakit. And then you have the clerk of court that would bang the door with her hands and say, all rise, United States of America versus Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. Can you imagine the most powerful country in the world accusing President and Mrs. Marcos of stealing from the Filipino people? Yun ang talagang nakakatindig ng balahibo. What are we doing in that foreign court? And that is the question I have been asking to this day. Why did all these people in the opposition not bring back Marcos to the Philippines so that he can face all of you and answer all your questions? Sabi kayo ng sabi, nagnakaw. Bakit hindi nyo pinabalik para siya ang magsasalita sa harapan ninyo? At ikikwento sa inyo kung saan nanggaling yung kanyang kayamanan. At hindi itong anak ngayon. Diyan na naman yung tinatapon yung batikos na yan. Naminana niya yung pagnanakaw na yan. My goodness. It is not even, logical. It is not even common sense. It is coming from the depth of anger, of hatred, of hubris. Na parang ang isip nila, sila na ang Diyos. And speaking of sila na nga ang Diyos, you have even members of those men of the cloth who speak as though they had the power of God to accuse people. Is it not the life of Christ, a life that has sought out the sinners? Was he not the one who said, let him who is without sin cast the first stone? How many stones have they cast on the Marcoses? And here you have Ferdinand Marcos Jr., and they are still casting stones at him. If we go by legal standards, that's exactly what we're trying to emphasize over this past 3 years that we have been talking and talking here. A criminal offense needs proof beyond reasonable doubt. In the same manner that you accuse Marcos also of human rights violations. A human right is a criminal offense. Again, you have your own creation, the Commission on Human Rights, for 3 consecutive chairpersons of that commission, certifying walang human rights case na final against the Marcoses. And yet you keep on accusing that he's a human rights violator. It's just words. But we still have a legal system. We are still a government of laws. We still also have the divine law, the law of God. And that is where retribution should come in. It is not simply a matter of accusation. Even Christ himself has washed the feet of his disciples and his apostles. The act of humility, as a matter of fact, is what brings us into the noble character of what it means to be a leader. And if we go back to the character of this young man, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who never spoke a word of hatred or of anger against the opposition, of his mother, who as soon as she was acquitted in New York, the first words she said was, "I have no bitterness in my heart because the system works." So kahit na yung mismong sistema na yan ng Amerika ang naglitis sa kanya at ginamit na lahat ng kanilang kapangyarihan para ikulong siya, na sinabi na rin at pinangako na rin ng prosecutor, "We will jail Imelda." Wala siyang nilabas na galit. At ang una niyang ginawa, nagluhod, naglakad ng paluhod sa simbahan, sa pinakamahabang, anong tawag nito, yung kanyang nilakad na paluhod hanggang sa altar, St. Patrick's Cathedral, in gratitude. Again, I repeat her words, "I have no bitterness in my heart because the system works." And that is perhaps why there are lessons that we have to learn over this past 36 years. Hindi ako nakikiusap na yung mga bumabatikos ay tumigil na, sapagkat yung mga pari at mga madre na yan, sila na dapat ang kailangan magturo nito. It is for them to be able to look into the role that they ought to play in society. There is that separation of church and state, but we are not separated body, mind, and spirit. We take care of our bodies, that we have proper food and nutrition. We take care of our minds, that we are educated and we have enough knowledge to get by in life. But we also have to take care of ourselves, of the spiritual aspect of our being that will live forever. At yan ang isang katungkulan na kailangan isinasagawa ng ating mga pare at ating mga madre, the care of the soul. We have just passed through Lent. We have had the celebration of Easter. We now have the celebration of a national victory for the people. Think about it. Ilan ba yan na bumoto for the Marcoses in spite of 36 years na pagbabatikos against them, in spite of all the accusations? They have not proven anything as far as pagnanakaw, unexplained, hidden wealth, at lahat ng yan. And the same manner goes with the human rights violations, kasi nga wala silang pinalabas na kaso laban sa mga Marcoses for human rights violation. But the biggest question is, why did they not allow the return of President Marcos to face all of you? Not just the Filipino people, but all of you who are accusing him. Remember, there is not one single individual that filed a case against the Marcoses. These are governments. Ito ang Swiss government, ito ang American government, at ito yung Philippine government under Corazon Aquino. 980 cases against Mrs. Marcos, dismissed na lahat for lack of merit, for lack of evidence. Hindi pa rin yan matanggap ng mga bumabatikos ngayon at sumisigaw pa rin. So, what we can do is we can join our hands in prayer that with the rallying cry of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., BBM as he is fondly called, magkaisa na. If we cannot be together in our political affiliations, then we can be together in this diwa ng ating pagka-Pilipino, because that is what is most important. And no matter how difficult it may be to thread that particular path, the road less traveled by or the road not taken, he will succeed if each and every one of us that cast the ballot for this particular important episode in our history, we can be together to make our nation progress the way it should. So again, as I've said, over the past 3 years, I'd like to thank all of those who have sent their congratulations to our program, all of those who have acknowledged that they have listened, the many hundreds of thousands, millions na ito na nakinig sa atin. Tandaan ninyo, magpapatuloy tayo sa mga kwento tungkol sa mga Marcoses. At itong anak ngayon na sa lahat ng data na ating natatanggap ngayon sa mga returns, siya na rin ang susunod na Pangulo ng ating Republika, kasama ng taga Davao na Mayor ng Davao City, si Mayor Sara Duterte. Mabanggit nga lang because again, I have to acknowledge The sorority that we founded and organized in the College of Law of San Beda, Sororitas Regina Juris, the Sisterhood of the Queens of the Law, on behalf of this sorority, and they call me Queen Mother because we were part of the founding members of this sorority. We would like to congratulate our sister, Sara Duterte. So again, acknowledging all of those that will have to be acknowledged. Ang dami-dami ninyo na nagpadala ng inyong mga congratulations. Ang congratulations na yan ay para sa ating lahat. At talaga naman nakakataba ng puso. At lalong-lalo na ang congratulations natin sa ina ng bayan. We have called her many names, but she has always been the First Lady, Imelda Romualdez Marcos. I can imagine how now, after so many years, 56 years, as she stood by her husband in his inaugural oath of office at the Luneta, she will now be standing by her son as the 17th President of the Republic of the Philippines. Maraming salamat po. This has been your hour. And this is Rita Gadi, as we continue with our prayer that our Lord will walk us through this season of both certainty and the future, so that our hearts will be open to the guidance of the Lord, and that we will have the strength to open ourselves to love one another as your first and only commandment, the way we should love ourselves. And so with this, we thank the Lord in gratitude, for to him belongs the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you for having joined me. This is Rita Gadi, and this has been your hour.